good to have you join us today. Hello, I'm Lee Ji-eun in Seoul. Coming up on today's edition of Business Daily. Korea's exports rebound in November thanks to increased outbound shipments of key industrial goods such as chips, steel, and machinery. Tomorrow is the deadline set for Korea's budget plan, but with the ongoing investigation into the massive influence peddling scandal, there are doubts on whether it will get passed on time. We'll sit down with an expert to talk about this. We start with some welcome news on Korea's trade front. After 3 straight months of decline, the country's exports bounced back into positive territory in November. But it's unclear whether this momentum will last, with a number of internal and external uncertainties down the road. Our Kim Min-ji has more.
Exports returned to positive territory in November. The Trade Ministry says outbound shipments rose 2.7% last month from a year ago to $45.5 billion. The rebound comes after 3 consecutive months of decline, following a brief turnaround in August, which put an end to 19 straight months of negative growth. Imports also turned positive, spiking more than 10% to $37.5 billion during the same period. With that, the trade surplus came to $8 billion, extending the surplus streak for a 58th straight month.
For both exports and imports, the value is the highest monthly figure since July last year. Won-denominated exports also rose for the first time in 14 months. The rebound is due to a rise in shipments of key export items.
In fact, 11 out of 13 key export items, including semiconductors, petrochemical products, and computers, bounced back for the first time in 31 months, due in part to increased demand as well as a rise in unit prices. On top of that, exports to major markets also posted positive growth. In particular, shipments to China, which account for about a quarter of Korea's exports, rebounded for the first time in almost a year and a half.
All in all, exports have fallen about 7% so far this year. And considering it fell 8% last year, we can't really say they've done better. But what's a relief is that it has been slowly recovering from the start of the year. The big risk factor would be the expansion of protectionist policies from the new U.S. government next year.
But there is also a glint of light. Experts say in the long run, exports could enter an upward trend as the global economy is expected to pick up next year from this year, and the latest decision from OPEC to curb oil production would likely have a positive impact on export prices. Kim Min-ji, Business Daily.
And Korea's consumer prices went up over 1% in the month of November, continuing its 3-month streak above that mark. Our Shin Se-min reports.
The consumer price index climbed 1.3% in November compared to the same period last year, unchanged from the previous month. Statistics Korea says Thursday that this comes on the back of soaring grocery prices. Inflation has stayed above the 1% mark since September after hovering under that figure from May to August this year. Core inflation, excluding volatile oil, and food prices also shot up 1.8% on year. Lofty prices of agricultural goods mainly drove up the consumer price index. The cost of farm goods went up 9.6%, while meat prices rose over 6%. Most notably, fresh vegetable prices skyrocketed by nearly 37% as the unfavorable heat wave and a typhoon that plummeted the nation in the summer dragged down the production. Services bills, including healthcare costs and rent, also went up 1.8%, while low oil prices pushed down the utilities by 6.4%. The Statistics Office says that an upward trend of global crude oil prices will help keep the price index on a positive growth trend. Korea's central bank also expects the inflation rate to accelerate on this oil price pickup this year, nearing its annual target of 2% next year. Shin Se-min, Business Daily.
Now, markets were skeptical they'd be able to pull it off, but they did. After months of pushing, OPEC members produced a plan to slash oil supply by more than 1 million barrels a day. Our Eunice Kim has the story.
After months of will they or won't they, 13 OPEC nations came out of their landmark meeting in Vienna on Wednesday with an agreement. The oil cartel would pump out 1.2 million barrels less per day, starting January of next year.
This is a major step forward, and we, with my colleagues, we think that it is a historic moment to come to this agreement, which will definitely help in rebalancing the market, and it will help reducing the stock overhang.
Though the cut was on the lower end of the preliminary production agreement reached in September in Algiers, markets cheered. The price of Brent crude futures, the global benchmark for oil, soared by more than 12%, exceeding $52 a barrel following the announcement. The hard-fought deal is the first production cut in 8 years out of OPEC, which produces a third of the global oil supply. De facto leader Saudi Arabia took a lion's share of the hit, agreeing to take on nearly 500,000 barrels a day of the cartel's total 1.2 million barrel reduction. It also agreed to let regional rival Iran, recently freed from economic sanctions, to keep production near its current rate of almost 3.8 million barrels. OPEC is coordinating with non-OPEC countries to follow suit with cutbacks of their own to bring oil prices back up to levels acceptable for the economies that depend on them. Russia has already said it stands ready to gradually lower levels in the first half of next year, starting with a rate of 300,000 barrels of its more than 10 million pumped out every day. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
Green growth is one of Korea's key national projects, and the government just recently unveiled a new set of incentives to give an extra push on that front. Our Kwon Jang-ho tells us more.
Starting next year, households in Korea that install solar panels on a detached home will be able to receive government subsidies worth up to 50% of the cost. That's more than double the current level of 20%. Owners of apartments who put up solar panels will also be eligible for an additional 25% subsidy on top of the 50% they already get. The new incentives are part of a government plan to increase solar energy adoption in private homes from the current 240,000 households to 700,000 by 2020. Solar panel usage in schools is also set to increase from 1,000 to 3,400. The Trade Ministry also announced that homes and schools that sell their excess power to utility companies will be able to secure longer fixed-term deals with them. Currently at 12 years, the deal will be extended to 20 years, ensuring longer stable earnings in the volatile energy market. The plans are part of a greater objective of cutting the nation's carbon emissions in line with the Paris Agreement on climate change that came into effect on November 1st. Currently, renewable sources account for 4.5% of electricity the country generates, and the target is to increase that to 11% by 2025. That's expected to help reach the target set by Korea last year of reducing emissions by 37% by 2030. Kwon Jang-ho, Business Daily.
To belong to the top income bracket here in Korea, how much do you have to rake in? A state-run institute analyzed income data across the span of 4 years, and our Lee Ju-young breaks down the numbers.
To place yourself among the ranks of the richest in Korea, just how much would you have to earn?
I think doctors would earn a lot of money. I'd say just under $500,000 a year.
I think people who work at conglomerates and large law firms would earn about $100,000 to $200,000.
I think business owners and those in management would make just under $1 million annually.
According to Korea Labor Institute, if you can rack up at least $102,000 a year, you can land in the top 1% here. But when it comes to the 0.1% bracket, the figures surge to over $306,000. Breaking it down by profession, chief executive officers accounted for about 29%, followed by doctors, who took up around 22%, and business owners. No public servants or people in the services sector made it to the top ranks. In terms of overall income, shareholders came in first, earning an annual average of about $1.1 million. Financiers and CEOs followed with an average of over $800,000. Following a steady trend over the past 2 decades, the country's income inequality has been getting worse over the years, with the leading 1% owning around 12% of the total income. Economists point out the Korean economy is highly likely to enter a period of long-term low growth starting from the second half of 2017, unless it reduces the widening income gap. They add that greater inequality can weaken reform measures aimed at enhancing economic expansion, leading to greater calls for inclusive growth. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
With just a day before the deadline to pass the record-high $340 billion budget bill for next year, experts are saying the lawmakers didn't have enough time to scrutinize the proposal because of the ongoing political scandals surrounding President Park Geun-hye and the top office. For more on this, Professor Kim Se-won from Ewha Women's University joins us in the studio today. So good to see you.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, so there are concerns that lawmakers on the Budget Committee are preoccupied with the ongoing political scandal. With that, what is the current state of the national budget right now?
Well, to make a long story short, it is unlikely that Congress will be able to finalize its examination of the next year's budget bills until the due date, which is tomorrow. Actually, the budget bill has been submitted to Congress from government in September, but the organization of a budget committee has been kind of delayed until November. But after that, the activities of the committee was all lost in the middle of a political scandal.
Now, next year's budget is Korea's largest ever budget to date. How does it compare to the previous budget plans?
Well, Korean government is increasing its budget size after 2008's global economic crisis. And in terms of size, the budget of the next year will be the largest. But in terms of the growth rate, it is about the 3.7% on annual basis compared to this year's budget size. And it is about 1% higher than that of the economic growth of this year.
Now, taking into account that Korea is highly likely to continue facing uncertainties both at home and abroad, some are actually saying that we need an even bigger budget plan for next year.
Well, some say yes and some say no about the size of the next year's budget. But it is important to remember that the government budget and government expenditure is only medicine to Korean economy, to sustain the Korean economy until global economy fully recovers. So in terms of the growth, the 2015's budget size has been growing over 5.5%. And in the previous year of the 2014, the growth was 4%. But actually, Korean government has been pretty much cautious on expansionary fiscal policy because they want to keep the soundness of the public finance.
Let's now take a closer look at the budget bill then. How is it going to be used?
Well, the relative size of each expansionary item was almost the same of this year's budget structure.
Okay.
But they are empathizing. They put very high priority on 14 projects. For example, they are increasing employment of the young people and searching the new industries that lead the future Korean economy and policies on aging economies and so on.
Now, one interesting thing to know here is that the government is actually planning to reduce spending on social overhead capital, or SOC, but then U.S. President-elect Donald Trump, along with other countries, are actually planning to increase spending in that area. So why the cut here in Korea?
Well, the budget on SOC has been decreased by 2 trillion won, and that became 22 trillion won for next year. But the thing is, according to Korean government's estimates, Korean economy is well equipped with infrastructures like highway system, railroad system, and so on. So they don't want to spend more money on SOC investment. So their long-term plan is decreasing their expenditure on SOC investment.
Okay, so with the deadline set for tomorrow, what are some of the major issues that political parties are clashing over?
Well, I think there are 3 hot potatoes on the budgeting table. Nuri budget, the expenses on preschoolers' education, and corporate tax, and household income. So I just heard that the opposition parties and ruling parties agreed on the size of the Nuri budget at the size of the 1 trillion won. But government is pretty strict on this point. They don't want to give yield an inch on local government's demands. And opposition party also wants to increase corporate tax from 22% to 25%. Instead, they want to decrease household tax.
All right. Now, I heard that during the past 28 years, Korea's National Assembly was able to pass the budget bill on time only 7 times. And experts are actually saying that it's more important for lawmakers to thoroughly examine the budget bill before passing it than passing it on time. So, especially at a time, I guess, when Korea is going through a political crisis, along with a lot of uncertainties stemming from both at home and abroad. So, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I do agree with their views. I think it is important to investigate and examine all the details of the next year's budget bill, even though it takes more time. However, if the budget bill does not pass the Congress by the end of the year, that will throw Korean governments and Korean economy into more confusion and more serious uncertainties.
All right, we'll definitely see when this gets passed. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you very much.
And that wraps it up for today. Thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with more at the same time, same place for your Business Daily. Until then, goodbye.